physical aggression, it's important to think about where this comes from. So I want to talk a little bit about family and friends before we jump into the measures. So in terms of family, it's important to understand the roles that genetics and the home environment might play in terms of physical aggression. So when we think about the genetics, it's alarming and astounding that physical aggression is very genetically based. In fact, the work by Alexandra Bird indicates that physical aggression is especially genetic and becomes more aggressive as we age. Now that may not be super obvious from looking at the chart on this screen. So we look at the chart here, what's going on is we see that the blue bar gets shorter as we age. So that is how well correlated monozygotic or identical twins are in terms of their levels of physical aggression. And we can see that it decreases over time. So it may seem like, oh, it's not that much. But what we're actually showing is there's different environmental influencers that of course impact us as we get older, but that doesn't tell us the genetic component. We actually have to compare the correlations between identical or monozygotic twins to fraternal or dizygotic twins. And in this study, they're comparing dizygotic twins of the same gender and dizygotic twins of different genders in the green and the yellow bars. But there's not a lot of difference there. It doesn't seem to be a major gender effect. What we do see is there is a major difference between the monozygotic and the fraternal twins. And when they're young, the proportion, the green bar takes up a longer proportion of the blue bar. The overlap and the proportion that's missing here that doesn't overlap is relatively shorter. The proportion that does overlap is relatively bigger. As we get older, we can see here the proportion of the height of the green bar compared to the blue bar. Well, now the green bar is a lot shorter than the blue bar, and the space that they don't overlap is proportionately bigger. And so what that is telling us is that genetically, the differences between identical and fraternal twins, it changes as we get older. Identical twins stay more similar as they get older than fraternal twins. Fraternal twins get more different as they get older as compared to identical twins. So because of this, this helps us to understand that there is a huge genetic component to physical aggression. Just through estimates, it's showing that roughly 55.2% of the variance in physical aggression can be accounted for genetically when we're between the ages of 1 and 5. So the variance is sort of how we account for differences and diversity in the population. And we can account for over half the diversity in physical aggression through genetics when we're young. We can account for 62.7% when we're school-age children between the ages of 6 and 9, and we can account for just a little bit more, 62.9%, when we're adolescents aged 11 to 18, showing that the amount of variance we can account for as we get older does get bigger. We've identified a few molecular genes that are very much tied to aggression. The major one with the most research behind it is the Mao gene. And we find that individuals with a certain type of mutation on the Mao gene, they produce a lot more hostile cognitive attribution bias, they produce a lot more rage and hostility towards other people, and it really seems to have a major genetic component. So aside from the genetic component, how does family situations contribute to physical aggression? Sadly, there are a lot of ways. We know, for instance, that maternal age, when moms have their first child, is predictive of physical aggression on all the subsequent kids. So if a woman has her first child at age 20 versus age 30, those moms who had their first child at age 20, their kids are much more likely to be high in physical aggression. We also know that environmental strains such as low income and low education, as well as the prevalence of mental health disorders in the family, can definitely contribute to physical aggression in the kids in that family. We know that substance abuse, particularly smoking by the mom, but also smoking by the dad and alcohol use, can contribute to physical aggression in the kids. And we know that family size. Families that have more kids tend to see more physical aggression. And that has to do with if you don't have siblings to punch, you're not going to show as much physical aggression. So larger families that face more financial strain and parents are experiencing more mental health difficulties or substance use issues, those kids tend to be at risk for higher prevalences of physical aggression. So what can we do about this? We know families are at risk, we know there's genetic risks, we know there's environmental risks. Well, Canadian researcher Dr. Richard Tremblay has spent his career dedicated to aggressive and criminal interventions. And what he has discovered in his work is although we find that acts of aggression can be much more serious and much more devastating when we're adolescents, we find that the true prevalence, the absolute score of aggressive acts, is actually highest at age 17 months. So toddlers roughly a year and a half tend to be the most aggressive they'll ever be in their lifespan. They might do worse things in the future, but they'll do them less frequently in the future. And Dr. Tremblay's work has indicated that maternal criminology is one of the biggest predictors of child criminology. That is, if the mom showed a high degree of deviant behavior, conduct disorders, then those kids were at an especially large risk for physical aggression. And so some of the intervention techniques focused on the family unit could look at training parents. We talked last unit about Bavalik and the nurturing parent curriculum. So something like the nurturing parent curriculum, teaching parents how to model more positive coping techniques and less hostile cognitive bias for themselves and for their family can be an effective intervention technique. Though this is a very difficult area to intervene in. Some of Tremblay's work started looking at young offenders and then looked at kids a little bit younger than the young offender age, and then looking at toddlers, and then looking at pregnant women, and then looking before they were pregnant, the women who had problems as teens who became pregnant, and really found this transgenerational effect. He's done some amazing work in this area, showing this cyclical nature of physical aggression.